Hey cherubs, Lovely here. I'm jumping in to read chapter 4 of the book of Pluto, Finding Wisdom in the Darkness with Astrology. Remember this book? Sorry, I can't actually make that small. Yoink. Sorry it took me so long to get back to this, but you know, life and all that jazz. So chapter 4 is Hope, Purpose and Possibility. He descended into hell. The third day he ascended into heaven. The Apostles' Creed. In the Christian mythos, there is a fragmentary tale that everyone knows but hardly anyone discusses. After the crucifixion and before the resurrection, Jesus visited hell for 3 days. A descent into the dark must precede an ascent into the light. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking, this rising in the shower. Anyway, let's continue. Certainly, this is one of the most profound teachings in Christianity. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually get taught very much, perhaps because it's so little understood. But even the least reflective Bible thumper would agree that the crucifixion and resurrection were inescapable theological necessities, and without them, Christ's redemptive powers would not have been available. In the Christian framework, Jesus in the flesh was powerful, but his full power could only be realized through the passion, and that means in part through his solitary journey down into the realm of demons. Well, we've seen demons and darkness enough in the last 3 chapters. Let's take a look at heaven. Hang on, just gonna have a drink of water because I need one. So if you're gonna listen to the chapter, maybe you want to grab a drink or whatever too. You got a bit of an ocean view, although it's getting clouded by the rain. Let me fix it, hang on. But I don't know why I did that, because it's just going to happen again, and it's not like I'm going to turn the wipers on every 5 seconds. Anyway. Enough of my chitter-chatter, let's get back to the book, shall we? Okay, so remember Sam. Hours before he nearly battered his young son, Sam had been humiliated by his boss at work. The line I used was almost a throwaway, designed only to set the stage for his touchiness that night. At this afternoon's board meeting, his new boss pinned a mistake on him to avoid taking the blame himself. Why does Sam have such a boss in the first place? Why does he tolerate him? Ask Sam or anyone before the plutonium plunge, and you'll hear a familiar litany of let's get real explanations. Bills to pay, responsibilities, mature visions of reality, and so forth. The real truth is that Sam was battered as a child, and he internalized the victim's role. Even worse, he had no idea that he's caught up in a scene that deadeningly reproduces the dark dynamics of his early biography. That unscrupulous boss is a clone of Sam's own abusive father. When Sam was a boy, he really was trapped. Kids don't have many options. Now in his adulthood, he experiences a certainty that he is irredeemably entangled in his job. And in typical human fashion, he excels at shrouding that psychological force in a gaze of rational, inescapable, external reasons. That unconscious assumptions, however illusionary, bind Sam to those limiting circumstances just as dependably as the pressures that keep a 4-year-old in the family home. Sam, in other words, has a beer can sitting by his existential compass. He is, of course, perhaps bound for the rocks. Worse, he has no idea that anything is wrong. Until that plutonian night. When Sam stopped his fist, something snapped inside him. A force that had been unconsciously shaping his biographical life now began to shape his conscious mood. Sam lay down on his bed in the dark. He shook all over. He cried. He felt ill, ashamed, alone, crazy. Horrible feelings. But wonderful news. The plutonian healing had begun. Sam's journey is just starting. Christ's 3 days in hell are either a symbolic number or wildly optimistic. Later, when we get to the technical chapters, we'll see that plutonian events can vary wildly in duration. Some lesser ones do pass by in a matter of days, Okay, so we do have Pluto in Aquarius for 20 years, okay? So that relates to that. So, as for example, when a quick-moving planet such as Venus or Mars passes over the place occupied by Pluto when you were born, others far less common can take a decade to unfold. An example of that, possibly for those of you with some technical astrological understanding, would be a progressed planet making a station in aspect to the natal Pluto. Typically, though, Plutonian events take a couple of years to develop. That doesn't mean Sam will lie shaking in the dark for that long. Nobody can. But his healing won't happen overnight. How will he heal? In principle, it's easy to say. He'll heal by making that which had been unconscious in him conscious. In practice, his dreams will guide him, even the dreams he doesn't understand or remember, the next morning. Thoughts, events, luck will favor and support the mending. Once a man or woman is committed to the healing process, it seems to unfold on many levels, triggered by the brave intention simply to face the dark. Sam will meet the right people as his inner willingness fires the healing laws of synchronicity. Sam may feel drawn to enter psychotherapy. He may find himself staring at old photographs, looking into his father's eyes, his mother's eyes, his own eyes, as they were imaged 3 decades earlier. He may see those people truly for the first time, bringing an independent adult level of awareness to bear upon them, replacing the distorted perspectives of childhood. Sam may find himself hungry to express himself creatively. Perhaps he takes up painting for the first time, and his canvases are unsettling masses of red and black and orange. Maybe he picks up an electric guitar, and his music is agitated, loud, and distorted. Lost in his canvases or his guitar, he is not thinking of himself in abstract psychological terms. Far better, he is experiencing quite directly the psychic energies surrounding his inner wound and releasing them. There are, in other words, many good roads open to Sam in that healing universe. His brave intention will guide him toward them and sustain him as he moves forward. He'll lie shaking on his bed in the dark more than once before healing is done. That, at least, is a good bet. And all along the highway there are exits, cowardly exits into self-numbing drunkenness in its 10,000 seductive forms. As we'll see, his birth chart will offer clues about the good roads and warnings about the exits in rather specific terms. But we've already mapped the bleak territory beyond those exits. Let's assume that the heroic dimensions of Sam's character stand their ground. Let's assume he stares Pluto in the eye so long and so fiercely that Pluto finally flinches. Which the poor moon priestess have taken a lot of undeserved heat over the centuries. I hope they will forgive me for pumping a little more air into the old myth of wrinkly creatures who foul wells eat children like a stockbroker eats sushi and enjoy the warmest conceivable relations with Lucifer. It's for good cause. Robert Bly, in his lecture, The Educated Heart, speaks of fairy tale witches in surprising terms. He speaks of the witch as a guardian of higher levels of consciousness. All the horrible negative behavior commonly ascribed to these witches he views as quite real and quite serious. The witch is diabolical, cunning, and utterly opposed to the hero's quest. She'll do anything to stop him, and she will balk at no lie or atrocity in the process. But in the end, according to Bly, if the hero succeeds in passing her, the witch welcomes him. It's as though she takes off her mask and, with the air of one saying, "It's all in a day's work," she pats him on the back and offers him a cool drink of water. To Robert Bly, the witch's purpose is not actually the prevention of attainments, healings, and realizations. It is to keep wimps out of the inner sanctum. The idea is that if she can't kill you, that means you're no wimp, and therefore you deserve the victory. And the witch, never resentful of the meritorious, recognizes that and honors you for it. This perspective is utterly Plutonian. To achieve heaven, we must pass through hell. To reach our own fullest potential, we must face our woundedness. To reach glory, we must suffer humiliation. Ashes lie on the road to the same throne. The witch sent Sam to his new boss, probably right as the Plutonian cycle was getting started in him. The witch arranged the boss's shaming lie at the board meeting, arranged that Sam's wife would be premenstrual that very day, arranged for little Billy's baseball to fly through the bay window, and the witch is simply a lively way of referring to the mysterious synchronistic principle that brings our inner dramas into outward manifestation during Plutonian times. But Sam stayed conscious, barely maybe. That was good enough. Under this kind of pressure, nobody is the soul of grace and composure. When the wound is up, there is a feral look even in the eyes of a saint. Sam succeeded. That's the bottom line. He forced the Plutonian energy out of the realm of behavior. That left it only one direction to go, up into consciousness. And the laughing witch welcomed him with an open heart. I'm just going to have another drink. Shadow. Shadow as a psychoanalytic term is ambiguous. Jung himself used it in a variety of contradictory ways. Sometimes it emerges as reference to all repressed aspects of self, including exceptionally positive and creative ones. Other times it's a more narrow reference to destructive or antisocial dimensions of the psyche. For our purposes, let's use shadow in the former, more inclusive sense. The shadow is part of Sam and is closely related to the testing wisdom guardian principle I am choosing to call the witch. A Jungian would quickly emphasize that the shadow is also an extremely energetic aspect of the human psyche. In a nutshell, the shadow embraces everything that gets you hot. As Sam marries the witch, he inherits the pagan fire of his visions, his desires, his sexuality, and his instinctual animal nature. As we observed at the end of chapter 2, it takes a lot of energy to remain crazy. That is, to hold out of consciousness large territories of our natures, memories, and desires. In reclaiming these lost psychic colonies, Sam experiences a heating up of his life beyond anything he's known before. Sex. Even those of you reading this book very late at night probably didn't take long to free associate to sexuality from the idea that the shadow gets a person hot. Sex fires up in a primal way, and certainly in the interests of maintaining civilization. Human sexuality also suffers considerable channeling into Shadowland. Much of it is cast into the dark, and what happens? Like white light hitting a prism, a spectrum of colors appears. We observe sexuality returning to behavioral expression in distorted, bestial forms, married to darker energies such as violence or greed. We see people so estranged from their basic sexual vitality that they become prunes, usually rather self-righteous prunes at that. Blessedly, we also see sexuality returning as the heat of the grown-up, committed psycho-spiritual passion, generating those levels of self-awareness and other awareness that lie at the heart of much true psychological wisdom. The wisdom you really have, not the lines you've memorized. Could sex ever flower that way if it were not shaped and forged by culture and tradition? Could it ascend into heaven if it had not first descended into hell? I doubt it, personally. Happy monkeys mating randomly on whimsy would miss by light years the caring and compassion that true commitment can teach. Sex is heat, metaphorically as well as literally. It wakes us up, deepens our attentiveness, sharpens our senses. Shadow energy reintegrated always feels that way. So does Plutonian energy when we begin to succeed working with it. For many of us, the simple prospect of the weekend's arrival has a similar effect. Why? Because on the weekend, barring incursions of duty, we finally get to act in according to our natures and desires, to act on the shadow energies. In other words, to do what finally and simply pleases us. And that broader notion of freedom and emotional engagement, rather than simple sex alone, it is really the point. Sex just illustrates it vividly. What do you want? Desire in all its forms seems so natural. We all spend a lot of time wanting one thing or another. The idea that being in touch with one's desires might present any challenge at all seems far-fetched. Yet, under Plutonian stimulus, people often find the core desires that shape their lives undergoing radical alterations and emerging in surprising ways. The desire for food or sexual release seems basic and almost universal, but even those biologically driven desires are not exempt from distortion or from healing redirection. As a child, Sam's father may have fed him junk food when the reward of sincere praise may have been more appropriate. Sam read the symbolism right. He correctly associated the consumption of potato chips with his inarticulate father's unspoken blessing. A blessing Sam needed all the more as a balance for his father's outbursts of violent rage. 30 years later, Sam loves potato chips. He really thinks he has a passion for them. And if we were to suggest to him that it's not potato chips that he wants, but the approval they symbolize, he would think that we had been reading too many psychological books. He knows what he likes, or so he believes. Damn, now I feel like potato chips. Anyway, the forces that numb and obscure our hunger for life, our natural individuality, would choose a work. Hang on, let me start that again. The forces that numb and obscure our hunger for life, our natural individuality, would choose work their devilment even more effectively as we begin to reflect upon those desires that are less biologically determined. One's choice of career, one's philosophy or religion, one's attitude towards money or art or politics. There, the Plutonian beer cans do their worst damage. Sam endures a tyrannical boss in an oppressive corporate situation. His father's violence biased him toward accepting a victim's role. What might he be doing with his life if he was free of that distortion? What, in other words, might be the liberating results of his conscious passage through Plutonian realms? In later chapters, we'll learn how much Pluto's position in the birth chart illuminates those questions. For our purposes now, it's enough to say that there is another professional course for Sam, and that if he does the Plutonian work, that course will open up before him and fill him with fiery intensity and total creative engagement, not to mention a diminished desire for potato chips. No shadow, no light. Once I was invited to speak at a psychological conference. The experience was unsettling, and it took me a while to pin down the reasons. Here were several hundred souls, all of them behaving in extraordinarily sensitive, tuned-in ways. I felt awkward, as though I were covered in mud and bacon fat and forgot to zip my fly, and I had to resist a compelling impulse to misbehave, to burp or snort like a pig. I'm sure that there were many truly wise men and women in attendance, but there was another guest, unnamed but present, a rigid culture of sanity. Those bright people had learned a complex set of healthy, sane positives, moves and attitudes, concepts really. And those concepts had to a great extent replaced a truer, messier human reality. To my eyes, they had replaced the sheer fiery vitality of the integrated shadow. When I was a kid, for a few years I played in a rock band. Their culture was similarly, I can't say that word, rigid. Cool was the ideal, and there were precise, well understood rules regarding how to fake that, just as the psychologists had learned how to create the appearance of tuned in, well adjusted sanity. Pluto rips that kind of posing to shreds. If we handle the experience wisely and bravely, we break out of those soulless, disassociated states of fakery, however politically correct they may be. We absorb our own heart. We begin to burn with humanness, with vision, and with the kind of hunger that drives a person into true creative individuality. Heaven is energy. A man or woman who has consciously navigated Plutonian waters emerges from the process with a certain wildness, about barbarian animal vitality. He or she does the unexpected and is hard to categorize. The personality seems less a set of opinions, concepts, and postures, and more of an expression of spontaneous instinct. It typically develops more forthrightness and jagged edges, more intensity, and markedly less patience with poses. Personally, I find it hard to avoid the conclusion that conscious Plutonian work turns people into vastly more interesting creatures. They are certainly more energized. There is a quality of aliveness and presence in them, often missing in the militantly well-adjusted, the militantly cool, the militantly spiritual. What will these Plutonian heroes do with their recovered vitality and recovered vision? Whatever they please, that's the bottom line. They are free, and whatever they do, they'll do it more happily than those who are still bleeding internally, unwittingly. As William Blake put it a century and a half ago, energy is eternal delight. That we cannot know what a graduate of conscious Plutonian experience will choose to do its basic truth. The behaviors of individuated people are vastly more difficult to foresee than those of the walking wounded, who tend toward a handful of self-numbing patterns and a few deadeningly familiar acts of self-destructiveness or other destructiveness. Still, those who claim the fruits of the hard Plutonian work do display one unifying pattern in their subsequent lives, and that pattern is the subject of the next chapter. Ooh, the next chapter, chapter 5, is fire. Excellent. Anyway, guys, hope that gives you a little bit to reflect on, and I will see you back here for chapter 5 sometime soon. Okay, bye.